Inside Politics. Our guest today is David Fox, who's a candidate for mayor. David, I know you're an advocate for charter schools to some degree, as Mayor Dean has been, but your website only mentions not-for-profit charter schools. Do you have a problem with for-profit charters?
I think we've been well served following the state law of not having for-profits in here. By state law, you can only have nonprofit operators, and I think that's been a better way for us to go.
How many charter schools do we need? They continue to grow throughout the system. There are concerns that they cannibalize the money and the funding for the other schools, the regular district schools. Are you concerned that there are going to be too many charter schools?
Our charter schools are doing a great job right now. They're really outperforming their zone schools at the moment. You know, how many charter schools do we need? I think the question is, how many good schools do we need? And to the extent we can find good people, capable people to operate effective charter schools, I don't think there's any moral alternative. I mean, to the extent that we can find a better operator and provide better choices to children who desperately need it, I don't see how we can do anything other than allow more charter schools to come in if we can find successful ones.
Staying for just a moment on your school board participation, when you were chairman of the school board, you supported a plan to privatize janitorial services in the schools as a cost-saving measure.
Right.
As mayor, will you look for other privatization of city services and city employees if you become mayor, in what areas?
Well, my responsibility as mayor will be to maximize taxpayer revenue. It's close to $2 billion. And while I don't have any specific plan to privatize anything or to look to an alternative, I think it's the obligation of any CEO of the city to find the most economical way of running something. I am very comfortable using the private sector to solve public problems, and so if the opportunity is there, I'd like to study it. You
talk a lot about needing to invest more in infrastructure, and is the Dean administration just not done enough of that? It seems to me they build a lot of repair a lot of sewers, do a lot of other things, build a lot of sewers and stuff like that.
And I'm not critical of what's done. It's just times are changing. You went from Mayor Bredesen, who did some larger projects, than Mayor Purcell, who tacked back to neighborhoods. Now we sort of tack back to bigger projects, and I think it's time we sort of tack back to neighborhoods again.
You worry about debt. The city perhaps is adding on too much debt. The council over the last several years has approved several major capital plans, and usually in the hundreds of millions of dollars. One just recently for $500 million. Are you critical of that? You don't say much about that specifically, about, well, we don't need to be spending that, we need to be cutting back on the amount of money we're investing in general in debt.
Right. My view is, going forward, like our debt rating was downgraded about 1.5 years ago. It's still a high rating, but it still was downgraded. My view is, I'm afraid there's kind of a culture of debt emerging, culture of spending emerging, that I'm hearing among the candidates who seem to think that unless we get in more and more debt at the municipal level, we can't have a good economy. And I think just the opposite. I think we can have a good economy just as long as we don't get ourselves into financial trouble with too much debt at the municipal level.
So what don't we finance for capital projects that we're financing now under the Dean administration?
I think we get more narrowly focused on this transit, and that's going to be the paramount challenge of the next mayor, in my view, because we have to shore up transit. We have to do some more water and sewer work at a time when our balance sheet has a ton more debt on it.
What is transit? Is for you, one of your Bill Freeman is talking about having a light rail system. What do you see as mass transit or transit for the future?
First, we have to move quickly on this because drive times are moving up. I really want to kind of crowdsource it. Let's pull together and find out what we want to do. I don't think the idea of using buses was a bad idea. I think the process for the AMP conversation was not real successful. It was not nearly inclusive enough. So I don't want to come here and say, well, here's my 30-page plan I want to inflict on the city. Let's pull together the stakeholders, crowdsource it, find out what we want to do, what do we have an appetite to pay for. And I know that if we move quickly, we can have a great transportation system that gets us around the city very well for the next 10 or 20 years.
You and Howard Gentry, who were here last week, seem to be the two candidates that are talking about crime. Most people seem to have thought that crime statistics were down in Nashville. Crime, if they weren't at the all-time lows, they were near historic lows. Are you finding something different? Are those numbers wrong, or do people have a different perception out in the neighborhood?
So even though the homicide rate has fallen sharply, and I think our police department has done a great job, one of the most striking findings we've found in knocking on 40,000 doors is the third or fourth most frequent concern on taxpayers or voters' minds is crime. Had a conversation about two months ago now with somebody in law enforcement in a high crime area who was just pulling his hair out, saying, we're spending all this time arresting young men mostly on fairly trivial offenses. We're putting them in jail. They've got a hard time getting jobs. In the meantime, he said we had arrested somebody for the 3rd time for his 3rd homicide. The first time he was off the streets for 10 weeks, the next time for a year. And he says there has to be a way to come down much harder on people who commit truly violent crime, and that's what I'm focused on.
We are the most incarcerated society in the world.
Yeah.
Do you think putting more people behind bars is the way to go?
No, I think we need far fewer people behind bars. My point is...
Or leave them there longer?
No, I think there's 2 things going on. We have so many people behind bars who have done very trivial offenses who never should have been put in prison to begin with. That's probably 2/3 of the people who are there. So we have a gross dysfunction going on of way too much incarceration, but oddly, the people who are killing people and shooting people, they're not staying in prison very long at all. So that's where we need to focus.
Your campaign website does not, I didn't find the word affordable housing on it, and I know it comes up in all the forums. So what is your plan about affordable housing? What I've heard you talk about it has mostly been in the area of gentrification.
It is, and it comes up a lot. The issue of both affordable housing and the related issue of infill development come up. My view is let's use the marketplace, let's give incentives to developers. I don't want to require them to build low-income housing or affordable housing, but I'd like to give them some incentives using the zoning code to say if something's zoned for 20, maybe we can upzone it to 30 if they'll agree to provide 5 or 6 units for below market price housing.
You've also raised concerns about the city's unfunded employee pension and health costs. I think it's in about the $3 billion area. The current administration seems to be wanting to address it by changing it, the benefit package for future employees. Is that going to be enough, or are we going to have to do more there?
That will definitely work on the pension side. The pension is the smaller of the two. Of the $300 million, about maybe 1/3 of it is from the pension. 2/3 is the health care benefits. And the recommendation from the committee who's been studying it is that if you grandfather all the current employees in with their existing program, you're fine, but you need to switch to a defined contribution plan to new workers.
David Fox, thank you for coming on the show. If you're successful in office, we'll have you back probably for the runoff.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Pat.
And thank you for joining us on Inside Politics. Hope you're back here again next week. If you can't get enough politics in the meantime, go to the News Channel 5 website. You'll find my Capitol View commentary there. There's new commentary posted every Friday afternoon. Have a great rest of the weekend. Charlotte Harbert Bone will join us next week as our mayoral guest. Have a great weekend and goodbye.